Glastonbury is one of those unorganized towns that pop up occasionally around Vermont, where the population levels are so small that operating it even as a very small municipality doesn't make much sense. In Glastonbury's case, that means we're talking in single digits. About 9 residents were counted in the most recent census in 2020. But it has an interesting history. A densely wooded and forested area, it was very lightly inhabited until after the Civil War, when its timber resources began to be logged extensively. Several kilns were built to create charcoal from some of the timber. A railroad line was built, and the remains of the track can still be seen today. By the late 1880s, however, the mountain had been cleared of nearly all its mature trees, and the town's economy dipped dramatically. In 1889, the railroad operation ceased. It was revived briefly in 1894 as an electric passenger trolley run by the Bennington and Woodford Railroad, and a brief and initially promising effort was made to convert South Glastonbury into a tourist destination. A small fortune was spent to convert the area into a mountain resort area, which opened in the summer of 1898, but a flood wiped out the railroad tracks that winter, marking the beginning of the end of Glastonbury as a functioning town. The population dwindled in the early 20th century down to only 7 in 1937, when the legislature unincorporated the town. Recently, Andy Holzman, a fellow Sunderland resident, and I traveled down to Woodford and drove up the road that leads you to South Glastonbury. Interested to reach the point where the former logging camp that briefly became a hotel alongside a casino on the other side of Bowles Brook once stood during the town's brief moment of tourist glory. You can still see some of the foundation walls amid the dense forest and speculate about what it once was like during its brief heyday, now returned to its more natural state amid new growth forest. So this is the railroad line over here?
Yeah, so we're walking along Harbor Road here on the way to the old Glastenbury ghost town. And so we start seeing the beginnings of the railroad bed here as we cross it several times leading up to where we'll eventually be as we move up. But this was the, back in the 1870s, the steepest railroad bed in the country. Went from Bennington 5 miles up to Glastenbury to pull charcoal and timber out of the mountains back in the 1870s, 1880s. And at that time, again, it was the steepest 5% grade railroad in the country. So we are standing at this site. So we are right here. And so across the river, all over there, that flat area, was the hotel. Originally, it was the boarding house for the 240 workers who, worked the kilns and did all the timber work. And then up the hill to the right here, where the trolley is here, this was the end of the line, or pretty close to the end of the line, for where the fancy folk from Albany came up for their weekend tour, and the trolley was here. And then right up the hill was where the hotel, where the casino was. And so we'll walk up there in a bit. You can kind of see like where the driveway would have been, the slow incline up here. So we'll take that to that area, right up in that area, and we'll find the foundations and some of the glass from the windows. And then the driveway continued down here, where there's a turnaround point where the trolley would then take people out. But these rivers were stocked by trout, so the tourists could come up and fish in the river. They also had trout dinners. You can find photographs online of what the early menu looked like there. For 50 cents or $1, you could have a full dinner, from fresh trout caught out of the river. And then the hotel was right over here in this flat area here. And so we'll walk there first. There's nothing there. We've been there before. I can't find any, at least on the surface, any remnants of anything. But
Tyler Resch, a former Bennington Banner editor and a librarian at the Bennington Museum, has written one of the definitive accounts of Glastonbury, and we turn to him for some extra background.
Came to Vermont, this is the early 60s. I was working for the Banner, and I was covering municipal government, and got interested in the whole concept of the importance of the towns, the Vermont towns. which seems to be much more important than in a lot of other states. And here was this intriguing town next to Bennington that was an unorganized town. And what does that mean? It's really intriguing. And there's nobody. The population had been for a couple of censuses had been zero, and so that's really quite intriguing. So I just made it myself. Made it a project to get up there and do some exploring.
So, as you say in the book, Glastenbury was, I believe, one of the towns that was sort of chartered in 1761 by Governor Benning Wentworth, but it didn't really seem to get populated until somewhat later, I guess, in the 1790s, 1800s?
The whole idea was that it's Benning Wentworth just drew lines on a map, square, 6-mile square, and he had no idea what the terrain was like. And of course, the terrain in Glastonbury is quite impressive, very high elevation. There's something like 12 peaks that are more than 3,000 feet, and I think it's the 6th highest mountain in Vermont. So the population settled very slowly up there. There were, I think, eight families in the census of 1791, all transient. Of course, they were gone by 10 years later with another 8 or so families, and so the only business was timber cutting. At first, later on, in the case of the village in South Glastonbury, which didn't get started till like 1872, the business was also wood, but it was charcoal, to manufacture charcoal, and that was quite an impressive industry for a very short period of time. But of course, there's the interesting apportionment aspect to it. A town, Glastonbury got down to what, about seven population in 1930, and it was all the Madisons. So in Montpelier, people started to get worried. Can we give a town of 7 people the same weight in the House of Representatives as the city of Burlington and the city of Rutland? And that's the way it was. So that plus a Supreme Court decision saying one person, one vote, that led to reapportionment in 1965, 66. And it also led to special legislation designating creating the village of the office of supervisor of unorganized towns. So there became a governor appointed supervisor in Glastonbury and next door in Somerset, where the population had also dwindled down to less than 20.
Glastonbury is also known for several unexplained disappearances, which add a slightly spooky flavor to the place as well. One of the best known of these was Paula Weldon, a student at Bennington College, who disappeared while hiking along a long trail in December 1946. No traces of her have ever been found. The case led directly to the founding of the Vermont State Police in 1947.
I maintain there's only been one documented disappearance of a person up there, and that was the case of Mitty Rivers in 1945. Then there's also the famous case of Paula Weldon a year later in 1946, but there's no evidence that she ever got into Glastonbury. She was along the long trail in Woodford. It was a very strange case. And there have been other people who put together a so-called Bennington, what do they call it, the triangle, but I don't put any stock in that. What I do put stock in is the extent of that territory up there. If you really get up there and you get off the trail, you realize what an enormous territory it is. And I'm sort of surprised that more people really haven't been lost up there. A great place to lose your way and get lost.
But don't let that deter you. If you want to take an escape into Vermont's fascinating historical past, Glastenbury and the adjoining settlement of Fayetteville are worth the walk. There's a nice trail up and down the mountain. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.